And hello and welcome. My name is Martin, and today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the different modes. I'm going to give you a quick overview on what those modes are and what they do, and then we'll go into the first mode, which is landscaping. So modes in 4.25 are going to be up here in the top toolbar. They used to be over here as the tab. It was actually the tab that was right there, and what we've been looking at right here is actually one of the modes. Right now we are in the select mode. So if we click on the modes button, we get a drop down menu and we get landscape, foliage, brush editing, and mesh paint. Now the mesh paint is the one that we're not going to talk about because for everything that we're going to do to create the landscape, all we need is to jump around between the select, the landscape, the foliage, and the brush editing. So landscape basically will create a grid. That grid will allow you to be able to create a much larger space. That space will be malleable. You'll be able to actually shape and sculpt it, and you'll be able to create something that looks like mountains, rivers, valleys, things like that. The foliage tool will allow you to very quickly generate and create a forest or an outdoor environment that looks somewhat natural. It will allow for variation of certain meshes or of the static meshes to create different height trees, size rocks, placement, space between objects, and so forth. And then from there we have the brush editing tool, which will allow us to take a geometry and select either a plane or vertices or a series of planes and vertices and stretch those out or pull them out or push them in to morph and change the shape of the geometry to better fit what we're looking for. And for us, we're actually going to build that little part of the roof here where we have where the hole is right there in our roof. So we'll create a custom geometry for that. So I am going to try to keep the video short, so we won't I'll try to limit what I talk about in each one of these, so then that way the videos stay between 15 and 20 minutes. So all right, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to go to modes, and we are going to go from select to landscape. And what we'll notice when that happens is that we get this nice giant green grid. Also that we go from place actors, and we now have a new tab up there that's called landscape. So let's take a look at it really quick. The first thing that we'll see is that we have the ability to add a material to it. This material right here is well, right now I've got it as grass. You can place any material that you want in there. By default, it should be blank. The next section is location, rotation, scale. Most of us should be familiar with that already, having done a lot of that. What I will point out is that the little box that I placed there, the geometry that is the base or the foundation for the house, is actually just a little bit below this, and I don't want to grab everything and push this up. It would be much easier to grab this plane and bring it down. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm just going to put that as close as possible to the edge of my foundation. If the foundation comes up a little bit, well, you know, that's somewhat expected, but now it's at the center of the grid. So let me zoom all the way out. Let me speed up so we can get there faster. And we'll see that we have now a much larger space. If 5,000 by 5,000 seemed big, we now have an area that's much bigger by a factor of a lot. The other things that we can do with this, obviously with the location, is if we wanted to, maybe we start you want to have a grid that's in this shape, but you want the character to start down here and then work across, right? So instead of starting at this location where this is in the center of the grid, maybe you want the character to walk across and get over here. So you don't have to leave these in the center. The one thing I would align obviously would be this to whatever the plane is that that you may or may not have already have set up. And maybe when you're starting a level for the first time, you do this first. You set up this before you start building anything on top of it. So instead of having this geometry down there, we would actually have the landscape instead. So the next thing we have is scale. I would not mess with scale, just leave that alone. That could stretch the material, and we don't want to stretch anything at the moment. So the next thing that we see is this option that says section size. So this says 63 by 63 quads. So if we go into this first square over here, we'll actually, if we were to sit there and count these out, we would have 63 squares by 63 squares. So that is the size of each one of those. If I were to go to, let's say, 127 by 127, I now have a much larger grid, obviously. And the reason for that would be that now I have 127 different placeholders left to right. So now each one of the individual squares are larger than they were before. Now, the advantage to doing something with more quads is the fact that you're going to get higher quality out of it. So the more quads that you have, or the more sections that you have, it's like increasing the resolution to a television. It obviously made the screen larger, but it also means that the materials that are going to go on there have way more vertices. So then that way, when you start molding and shaping the material, it'll stretch better. Again, this is going to take more space on your computer, or it's going to take more processing speed and RAM to be able to do this. So for us, we're just going to leave it on 63 to 63. If we walked from one edge of this to the other edge of this, it would probably take us about 1 minute. Another thing that I'll point out real quick, and we'll zoom in and just get a character's perspective from this. We'll be here like, let's say let me slow down the camera so we can get at character level. Too slow. Let's go back to about a 3. All right, so we'd be about this tall. Now, if we look across, we see that we have a perfect horizon. If I was to go in one direction, like I said, you could probably travel about a minute's time from one end to another end at that 63 by 63. So it's big enough. You don't have to get super crazy. Now, if you've got a really fast computer and you want to test your computer out and see how much, what it can handle, by all means, maximize this out, follow along with the rest of the lessons and see if you can get how big of a level you can work on. The only thing I'll stress is that remember that at some point you'll have to share levels with other people in your group. So I would always think about the lowest speed or the lowest capability of the computer that's going to be working on the project, what it is, and then figure out what, do I need, can all the levels be really big because everybody's got a fast computer, or does somebody have a slower computer and they need to make a smaller level, and they may not be able to test larger levels because their computer's not fast enough to do it, to be able to generate everything for you. So things to think about when you're deciding how big you need this to be. The next thing that we'll see is the 1x1 section. The other option that we have is 2x2. Obviously what that's done is we can see that it's made the grid a lot bigger, but in each one of the individual larger squares we now have 1, 2, 1, 2. So that's what it means by 2x2. And because of that, I think it's like 4 times larger. So again, this will take up more processing space and more computing power to be able to do that. So keep it small. The other thing you can also do is you don't have to stay with a square shape. You could make this rectangular. So if I wanted to, I could say, let's say 16 by 16. And let me do that, or 16 tab by 8. And now I have something that's more rectangular in shape as opposed to square in shape. Again, the more sections that you add, the more processing power you're going to need. So I'm going to leave it at 8 to 8. The other thing we'll also see is the overall resolution. This is tied to the number of components, and as you add more resolution, it will increase the size of the grid in that direction or the other. And you'll see that the numbers are related. So let's put this back 8 to 8. And the last button that we see there is the fill world. And what that will do is it will go 32 to 32 and gives you a large area map. So, again, if your computer can handle that, great. If not, let's stick to the smaller size. So let's go back to 8 to 8. I'll zoom back in. Let's go a little faster. Okay, so we're back. Okay, So that's the fill world. And then obviously to generate this, we need to go ahead and hit create. So let's do that now. All right, when it comes in, if we zoom in, we'll see the material that we placed on there. By default, it's going to come in incredibly, I call this the Mario effect, where, you know, it's just been tiled over and over and over again, and they're all in rows with each other. So what you see are these really, really bad lines going out. We will fix this later. For right now, I just wanted a material on there so it would come in with something that would reflect light from the sun, and that we would be able to see what we're working on. Okay, so once we've created it, what it does is it sends us automatically to the sculpt tool. We'll see now that we have these 3 tools, and each one of those tools has a series of buttons. We will talk about the manage tool in this tutorial, and then we will pick up in the next tutorial with sculpt, and then we'll do one for paint. So let's look at what sculpt or the manage tool allows us to be able to do. So let me zoom out, or let me get faster so I can zoom out faster. Okay, so right now we have this, you know, really boring square. With the manage tool turned on, what I can do is I can actually select areas of this square. And whatever I've done with this, I can then, once they are selected, let's say, for example, hit delete. And because all of those were selected, once I click in one of them, it will actually delete the other ones. So let's say that your designers or your and here I'm doing them individually because I've still got the delete key turned on. So let's say the people that you're working with in your group come in and say, you know, we really don't need all this space over here or all this space over here, because we're going to set up some kind of like a little valley scene where there's like a little bit of mountains here, a little bit of mountains there, maybe some mountains running across the back with like a little river running through, right? So if we're going to set that up, we really don't need these squares right here, these squares right here, because you won't be able to see them, because we're going to create like sort of like this is in a mountain pass, and the character won't actually be able to see above this area right here. So in that case, all this would be more space and stuff that the computer has to generate that the player will never see. So if we can reduce space and a little bit of processing power, that would be great. Now, let's say another thing that they also say is they want to put what looks like a giant mountain peak in the background, right? So we want to have enough material here that we actually can pull that up without it stretching or looking too bad. So the other thing we can do is we can also add sections. So just like we could delete sections, we could now sit there and add. So I'm going to go ahead and pop in just a little bit of extra material here, and that will allow us to be able to create, you know, some more realistic looking mountain range in the background. So let's do that and this, and we will do a delete on that and this. Okay, so now we have the shape that we're going to pull up, and we have a game area that is more or less tailored, or a custom shape, as opposed to it being just that absolutely boring square. So the other thing you can also do with this is you could set up 2 areas. So if I wanted to, I could set up another grid. So let's say I create a new grid, and I maybe move this one over here, and let's say this is an area that is on the other side of a mountain pass or something, and they have to get through this little area here where the river goes through for whatever reason. So once that's there, I have whatever size I want. Let's go ahead and hit create. It's now there. And let's go to, again, to manage. Let's create new. And no, we don't want a new one, sorry. What we want to do is we want to add, so then that way we can actually piece those 2 areas together. All right. And maybe I'll delete one of these on either end, so then that way this thing stays. Well, you know what? I want to build the walls back up, so let's add 2. There we go. And this area doesn't have to have all that space. Let's say it's just a small area that's going to be coming in. So let's go into the delete, and Okay. There we go. And so maybe we'll do something like that, and I'll knock out a couple more of these, and we'll say that they got to get through that pass. There's this another little area right here, and then the area that they want to end up in is over there. Okay, awesome. So now we have this really cool custom area that we used, that we created 2 landscapes. We joined them together. We saw what the select, the add, and the delete do. The move will move whole sections from one area to the other. We don't need to do that right now because we don't have anything on them at the moment. We could just use the add and delete. And then the spline says having a control point selected where you can new control point with a segment. Spline mesh settings can be found on the details panel. We won't worry about this yet. This is going to be a little bit more advanced than what we're trying to do, just setting up a general game area. So for us, underneath manage, we're going to do new. If we wanted to set up a new area, theoretically, I could have just hit add and added those all in individually. There's literally no difference. And then you have select, which will select a group of them together. Add, you see what it did. Delete, and we'll not mess with move or spline at the moment. Okay, so that is adding a landscape, shaping, and tailoring it to the level that you are going to be creating. Hope you enjoyed the video, and you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.